Aventa is a new music ensemble based in Victoria, BC. Typically, we perform as a sinfonietta. Sinfonietta is it's a double quintet. We have winds, we have brass, string quintet, and piano and percussion. And that's our normal complement musicians. Our tour. Aventa is going to be performing in Regina, London, Montreal, and Toronto for our upcoming national tour. We're bringing music from Anna Sokolovic, of course, as well as British Columbia composer Rodney Sharman, Ontario composer Paul Frainer, and the Dane Paul Reuters. In addition to our concert in Montreal, I'm happy to say that baritone Vincent Rinaldo will also be joining us the following evening in Toronto. We were introduced to our baritone Vincent Rinaldo from the Quebec composer Gilles Tremblay. Several years ago, we were performing Gilles' work à Quelle heure commence le temps, and Gilles recommended that we get in touch with Vincent. And since then, we've had a chance of performing with Vincent on several occasions. It's always a great pleasure. Well, Anna and I have been discussing many possibilities for programming, from an adaptation of 9 Proverbs through to an entire reworking of Concerto for Orchestra in revision for Ensemble, perhaps a project for the future. It was always my hope to present Sentimental Geometry, which we had performed in Victoria and Munich last spring. When Anna suggested revising Tanzerlieder for baritone, I knew we had the right program based around those 2 works. In regards to the other works on the program, there are really 2 themes here. The first surrounds voice and opera, and we can see that in Rodney Sharman's Prelude to Elsperlis and Reuters' Capricho. And the second's more dance influenced, and sections of Tanzerlieder, cabaret songs come to mind immediately. Certainly Paul Frainer's Voluptuous Panic. Hopefully this will all tie together nicely. Our concert opens with Rodney Sharman's Prelude to Elsperlis.
I wrote Elsperlis with film director Adam Agoyan. We wrote it over a period of about, I guess, 5 or 6 years, starting in the 1990s. It was finished in 1998, and the section that you will hear this evening is the orchestral interlude to Scene 4, which I wrote in 1996. And I remember the day that I started composing it very vividly because it was the day of Takemitsu's death. And I had admired Takemitsu's music very much. We had only met once, but we had mutual friends, and well, there's something, I suppose, of the spirit, especially in the violin writing, of Takemitsu's music sort of enveloping the piece. And I thought how beautiful to make an arrangement of this for Aventa for their tour, for their fantastic violinist, Müge Büyükşehir'in. The story of Elsperlis concerns Canadian diplomats in Africa. And as we all know, the situation of Canadians in Africa is extremely complex and fraught with good intention and terrible mistakes. In this, the Canadian diplomat who becomes ambassador of this country is French-Canadian. His boyfriend is English-Canadian, and they have a houseboy who, in the course of being with them, learns not only how to speak English beautifully and fine manners, but also how to do things like make a crab souffle. He eventually becomes the kind of center of this piece. His name is Malcolm, and his aspirations to go to a Canadian university, which the ambassador stops from happening by never writing him a letter of recommendation. And this lack of letter of recommendation freezes this African boy, Malcolm, from attaining his dreams with horrible results.
It's wonderful to see so many performances this season of Tanzerlieder. I think the 2004 version for soprano and 3 instrumentalists is an extraordinary work. There's also a version for voice and piano alone. So we were just delighted that Anna agreed to write Aventa, a new version for baritone. It's also a pleasure and it's a great excuse for our ensemble to work again with Ensemble. Tanzerlieder is based on poetry from the Austrian poet Francisco Tanzer. There are 5 quite defined sections. Let's call them sketches. Upon a Star, Stimmen, December, Wishing Well, and Last Song. And as different and characteristic as these may be, the work flows really smoothly throughout, without interruption. It's either attack or, in the case of the last song, it begins with a flute interlude. There's never a feeling of an episodic approach to the text, but instead it's really one of unity throughout. The text is set in 3 languages. It's English, French, and German. In the case of the last song, they all pair together, and it's totally natural, the use. Sometimes the rhythm of the text just takes over. As in the English text in the Wishing Well, the fourth of the sections. At first glance, I thought when I looked at the score, oh no, this doesn't really fit with the rhythm of the language. It's in English. But I was wrong. And of course, it's beautifully woven in by Anna, and at times it feels as if the music is going to fall forward on itself. It's just fabulous. The text is kind of simple. It's continuum to continue, continuum to continue. But then this little helpful little breath disappears and it starts to float over this 8/8 measure in 3, and it becomes continuum to continue, continuum to continue, continue, etc., etc., etc. And this kind of use of rhythm is something I really love in Anna's music. Yes, it's rhythmic, and at times it's really quite complicated, but it's also natural and it's musical. And I think Wishing Well is just a great example of that type of writing. Tanzerlieder comes to a close with Last Song. And I find this movement incredibly striking and moving. The baritone literally hangs over these fragile vibrations in the flute and the cello. They're really barely audible. And with these otherworldly piano chords just dropping in, it all really finally comes to a close just on a murmur. It's very beautiful and very effective. The Danish composer Paul Reuters is an absolute master of the Sinfonietta. He manages to take 14 players and create orchestral impact. It's just a remarkable achievement. In Kafka-Capriccio, Paul has not only taken the massive forces of his 2005 opera Kafka's Trial down to 14 players, he's also created 5 short works which follow the primary characters and direction of the opera, from the klezmer-inspired opening through to the inevitable execution. In this opera, 2 plots run parallel throughout. Franz Kafka's private struggle, in particular with one woman, Felice Bohr, who cannot make up his mind whether or not to marry, and the fictitious story of the hapless Joseph K., the victimized and rather obnoxious protagonist of Kafka's famous unfinished novel, The Trial. If you refer to the program notes for the evening's concerts, they go into detail on each of these movements. Voluptuous Panic is the second work that Ontario composer Paul Frainer has written for the Aventa Ensemble. We've really enjoyed the opportunity of getting to know this composer's music. Voluptuous Panic is in 2 movements. First movement, Escape Velocity, has many sources of inspiration. Fast cars, loud motors, racing, in particular the Monaco Grand Prix, downhill ski racing, the NASA's Vomit Comet, and the training plane used to simulate zero gravity, G-force, and the idea of trying to break through the Earth's gravitational field. The second movement of Saltarello, Paul tries to capture that transported sensation resulting from fast folkloric dancing. The medieval Italian Saltarello dance form in particular is a source of inspiration here, with its fast leaping melodic figures and the use of a ritornello. In keeping with the spirit of the first movement, this dance takes place beyond the Earth's gravitational field. It feels like it sometimes when you're playing it. I should add there's some really lovely percussion writing for Bob Slapkoff. Paul's written parts for frame drums, guitar, and pandero. and they both make use of hand drumming techniques. It's an incredible sound with a timbre that's unique from other percussion instruments. Also looks really cool. Now, why did I add cabaret songs to the program? And programming can be a bit like a Rubik's Cube, and I think that cabaret songs will fit very nicely. A beautiful diversion between voluptuous panic and sentimental geometry. It's a short, light, and highly entertaining work. I think the placement will allow the other works to be seen in an entirely different light, kind of like hanging art.
I've written a series of cabaret songs. There are now 8 of them, and there's a 9th one in my head. I've been writing them for a little bit more than 10 years now. It started out as really gifts for a friend of mine who is a singer, a femme de certain âge, who had a wonderful voice in her youth, and I wrote these as a kind of vehicle for her to revive her career. And she sings them marvelously, and since they've taken on a kind of life of their own, I tend to write them as acts of love, or when I really want to. It's part of my artistic personality, I suppose, to write cabaret work in the way that it was for Arnold Schoenberg. And cabaret is part of my life. I, after all, went to school in Germany where there was a cabaret theater in the Stadttheater where I played in the opera orchestra. And I was involved in several cabaret performances, particularly in the work of Reinhard Kager and of Maurizio Kagel, back when this fantastic Argentinian performer who was one of the main actors in the Stadttheater Freiburg. So in a sense, it's something from my youth that I now do as I enter midlife, or shall I say deep in midlife. So some of the cabaret songs are funny, some of them are sad, some of them are with text by the famous opera commentator Bill Richardson, who does Saturday Afternoon at the Opera for English radio and is an award-winning comic. Some of them are with text by Joan Scogin, the novelist and journalist. A few of them are with my own text. The first cabaret song was written actually in honor of Louis Andriessen's 60th birthday on the occasion of him giving up smoking. And so it's all about the love of cigarette, and the text is in English, and I wrote German and Dutch text to this. The songs that you're going to be hearing this evening are in English, German, and French. 2 of the songs, the English and German, and the English and French one, I wrote myself, and the text translates itself, as it were. I like very, very much these old cabaret songs, which take place in English, French, Russian, German, often in the same song, like those of Friedrich Hollander. So they're very, very fun to do and to share with the Montreal audience for the first time.
Well, it's great to be able to present this work. Géométrie Sentimentale has become a classic in the repertoire. Again, we're looking at 3 movements. They're performed tacca, but they leave no doubt to the listener as to where we are within this work. I especially enjoy the rhythmic layering of Anna's music, the overlapping and sliding of rhythms. And the first movement is quite striking. In the strings, we have a bubbling ostinato-like figure. But on top of this, we have the winds in 8s, and then in 7s, and then in 6s. And then this is flipped on itself. And again, like so much of Anna's music, it doesn't sound technical, but rather it sounds like a giant musical machine winding down. In the second movement, we're just on the edge of sound, with a very soft pianissimo D flat. This passes between the clarinet to the trombone and back and forth over a bed of strings. And finally, after 8 very, very slow measures, the horn and bassoon literally bump us out of this with these B's and C's. It's really a great moment. In the last movement, the pianos, winds, and brass lead us through an array of amazing metric modulations, and with motives from the oboe and the clarinet woven into the texture. Finally, it all seems to unravel. Even the pitch disappears, and the last word on this work goes to the percussionist.